Today I'm finally filming a video that I wanted to do for a while because it is a question that comes up frequently on my channel and on other platforms where people send me DMs. And it's about these two cameras here. It's the Leica M system and the Q system basically. This is an M6, but I don't own a digital Leica M anymore, only the Q. That should already give you a hint which camera system I prefer. And let's work out what differences are, and maybe there's something you can use if you are shopping for either Leica M system or the Q. But before we do that, a quick announcement. Hashim from the Pushing Film channel and we had a live stream a few days ago, and in that live stream we announced two street photography workshops that we will have in Australia this November. So there will be one in Sydney and one in Melbourne. So make sure to not miss out on that. I think this will be awesome. If you want to know more, the link will be in the description box down below. And also, if you're waiting for news on the new zine, it will come shortly. Bear with me. There are some difficulties, but I will make a dedicated video talking about that. So let's jump right back into the topic of today's video. So if you're in the market for either of these systems, I think it's a valid question, especially if you shoot primarily 28. And I would argue that even if you prefer the 35mm focal length, it might be a valid question if the M or the Q is better for you, because the Q has 47, or the Q2, and in this case the monochrome, they have 47 megapixels, and I mean it's only a slight drop going from 35 to 28mm lens. So I think the Leica Q is also a valid choice for people that primarily shoot 35mm. Of course, if you primarily shoot 50mm or you want to be able to change focal length all the time, then probably the M is the better choice for you, but that should be very obvious. The good thing about the M is that it also gives you frame lines for 35mm, for 50 and 75, but I think 75 is a little bit too much. But if you primarily shoot 35, you can have the frame lines displayed in the viewfinder, also on the screen, for 35mm, and this gives you a somewhat similar experience to shooting a rangefinder, because you can basically see what's going on around your frame. And in the end, if you shoot RAW, all the information is there, and when you go back in post-processing, you can change the crop afterwards. I think that's pretty cool. But talking about the viewfinder, I mean, this OVF on the M6 and also on the digital ones, I really enjoy them. They're really nice, but there's also some downsides to it. Okay, problem number one is viewfinder blockage. If you shoot, or if you ever shot a Leica M, you will know what I'm talking about. And on this one, on the bottom right corner, maybe 25%, round about that, is blocked by this lens and the lens hood. If you use a smaller lens, it's less likely to happen, but these lenses are often not as fast as this one with an aperture of f2. And if I upgrade this one to Summilux, it will be even bigger, and this can be an issue because sometimes there's something in the frame that you will not see and afterwards you will regret. But it's not ideal. You can work around it, but you know the problem, I guess, if you ever shot a Leica M. And another problem that has to do with the viewfinder, the OVF in here, is parallax error. That means your framing will never be 100% accurate, and especially if you get very close. If you're really, really close and you have something that is in front of your lens, you might not see it. So this can throw off your composition. It hasn't been a big deal for me, but if you want 100% accurate focusing, you have to use live view, or if you shoot the Q, you won't have that problem. So with the Q, accurate framing of your shot is much easier than with an M. Now the OVF in the Leica M is lovely and I love using it, but I think I prefer the EVF in the Q2 and the Q2 monochrome in this case, because it's an OLED screen and I can already see the exposure, so I know my exposure is spot on, and I don't have to rely so much on the metering system in the Leica M, which isn't the most accurate. Supposedly it got better on the M11, can't talk about that, but on the M10 or other M cameras that have live view, you need to use live view if you want to see the perfect representation or take a test shot. On this one, I don't really need to because I can see it right away. So I think I prefer that over the OVF. And also, sometimes I use the spec screen because it's a little bit faster, because if I don't need to bring out the camera to my eye and I can already shoot here, it's a split second, and sometimes the split second can make a difference in street photography if you get the shot or not. So I would say in general, I prefer the system on here, but still, I mean, you can't go wrong with an OVF on this one. It's pretty awesome, I have to admit. Now, when it comes to usability, I think I much rather shoot the Leica Q, because I can be a fair bit faster, especially if I want to use autofocus when I shoot at night or I want to shoot wide open. Autofocus is more sufficient and much faster when shooting this. Of course, if I only shoot stop down to f8 or beyond that, it doesn't really matter, because zone focusing is the best thing you can do with the Leica M. But I think in general, if I have to decide which one I prefer, I think for usability, I think this is the way to go for me. For usability, I just told you that I prefer the Q, but when it comes to manual focus, I mean, there's nothing that can beat this. A lens with a really nice focusing tab on here. It feels so organic, and also using the rangefinder patch is such a joy. On the Q, there's also a tab, but it feels more stiff in comparison. For a digital camera, it's good, but shooting this is pretty awesome, and I wish that the focusing experience on the Q would be as smooth as on this one, but yeah, you can't have it all. But for manual focusing, I have to give it to the Leica M system. It's just unbeatable. Another difference that you can consider is weight, because a similar system like the Q, for instance, in this case the M with a 28 millimeter Summicron, will roughly weigh 30% more than a Q. It doesn't sound much, but if you carry around the camera around your neck all day long, you might notice. However, the Leica M11 is, in general, I think the black one is 100 grams less than the silver one, so the difference is a little bit smaller, but it's still there. So if weight is important for you, maybe this is also the better choice. Now, before I want to address the elephant in the room, that is pretty much the #1 reason I would choose this over the Leica M, there's another thing that speaks for the Q as well, and that is that it's more quiet. I mean, the shutter in here, because it's leaf shutter, you can barely hear it. On the M, yes, of course, the newer ones, especially the M10P and newer ones, the shutter got a little bit quieter, but it's still not as quiet as this one. In an environment where it's very busy and there's lots of people, you will not notice. But if you're in a place where it's very quiet, you will notice the difference. And especially, I mean, it's not street photography, but when I shoot a wedding and they use a Q, I can get very close from behind and people will not even notice that I'm there, and I can take a photo. With the M, they would turn around 100%. Now let's finally address the elephant in the room, and it's not pricing, because I think it doesn't make sense to compare an M with the lens to the Q, because in the Q the lens is fixed, and if the camera doesn't work anymore, you can also throw away your lens. So it's not a real good comparison, so it's not that. But there's another thing, and that is with the Q, if you want to shoot flash, it can sync up at any speed, up to 1/2000, which is the fastest mechanical shutter the camera has. And if you shoot a digital M, you can only sync up to 1/80th. And that is a huge difference. I don't shoot flash all the time on the Q, but sometimes I do. And on my workshops, more often than I expected, students wanted to try a flash on the camera. And so I was handing out this flash to a couple of students. Some of them had a Q, no problem. They were shooting just a regular, maybe an M or a camera that has a normal shutter. And on that also the shutter speeds, usually the sync speeds are maybe 200, 1/250th. And that is a big difference, because on here it's much more convenient to shoot flash. But let me explain. By the way, I'm right now shooting below this really beautiful walnut tree. Really nice, so maybe see if they're already eatable, so I might snatch a couple. Okay, you probably know the exposure triangle. There's shutter speed, ISO, and aperture, right? So that's how you get your exposure. However, when you use a flash on your camera, the only thing that will determine your output of the flash is the ISO and the aperture you are using. The shutter speed is not. So the shutter speed on this one, the only thing I do with the shutter speed here is control my ambient light. If I want to have less, that's very easy. But on the other hand, on the M, for instance, because you have to shoot at 1/80th, because it's the maximum sync speed, you have to shoot at that speed. That means in a daytime, maybe when it's really bright, you have to shoot at 1/80th or slower than that. And even if you lower your ISO to your lowest ISO, you still need to shoot at f8, f11, maybe even f16. And that can be a problem, because then what happens then is, if you use your flash, you have to shoot at full power, because you need a lot of power to overcome your aperture that is down at f22 or maybe f16 or whatever. On here, not so much, because I can just shoot at 1/2000th and set maybe the aperture to f8 and I'm good to go. So I think that's a big plus for the Leica Q2. And by the way, this is also true for any camera that has a leaf shutter, like the Fuji X100 or maybe the Ricoh GR. So also these cameras have a leaf shutter and you can pretty much sync at any speed, which is super nice. And I remember back in the day I had the X100S and I was using flash with the camera, and it was amazing because I could use a very small flash and shoot in really bright daylight and got really good results. So I think for that it's absolutely awesome. Now let's give you a more practical example of what I'm talking about. For instance, on my workshop in London, we were heading out and I was shooting the flash. I decided I would shoot flash because it was an overcast day. It started overcast. So what I was doing, I was setting my camera in the beginning to 1/500th and f8 to f11. Because I used manual focus, I was focusing down to 0.7 to 1 meter because I wanted to get really close. And in this case, because I was using the aperture of f11 to maybe even f16, I got a really wide depth of field. That's what I wanted, because I wanted a lot of things in focus. So in this case, of course, this will affect also the flash, because the flash output will get lower. But to compensate that, I just raised my ISO. I was shooting at ISO 800. Like I said, f16 maybe. Later when the sun came out, I was shooting at 1/1000th. And that's awesome, because on my flash here, I was only shooting at 1/8th power. So the flash was lasting me all day long. I shot hundreds of photos with this flash and the two AA batteries in here. So that was awesome. Of course, you can do a similar thing on the M. You can shoot at 1/80th. You close down the aperture and maybe to f16, and you can slap on an ND filter, maybe 3 stops. So you have roughly similar exposure settings that I had on the Q. But that also means you now cannot shoot your flash at 1/8th power anymore. Now you have to shoot it at full power. This will have a very negative effect on your recycle time and also on the batteries in your flash. And also if you come up with different lighting scenarios, so suddenly it gets darker, then you have to take off the ND again, and it's a pretty big mess. So on this here, I just changed the shutter speed. That's it, because that's the only thing that controls my ambient light, and that is pretty awesome. And that's, for me, I think the #1 feature of the Q, and that's the #1 reason probably I prefer the Q over the M. Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. So if you shoot flash, you should consider this, because this can make a big difference and it can make your life so much easier. So these are the main differences between the Leica M and the Leica Q that I worked out over the last couple of years when I was shooting both. But of course, I don't have the digital M anymore. I sold it a few years back because I enjoyed the Q so much more, and for me that system made much more sense. But however, since I also shoot film, I can have the best of both worlds, because on film I love to shoot this. And when I sold my digital M, I immediately picked up a Leica M6, and yeah, because I still wanted to shoot an M, and with film I can still have that awesome experience shooting a Leica M. So in the end, you cannot go wrong with either system, but there's strong sides or strong suits for one or the other. In my case, I prefer this. For you, it might be very different. Let me know what maybe your reason were to, or your reasons were to pick up this, the Leica Q, or maybe the M, or maybe you have both. Let me know in the comments down below. And also, I really enjoyed shooting this video outside. I mean, it's a very nice late summer day, evening here. It's pretty awesome, and I used different lenses, different focal lengths to shoot this video. Let me know if you can figure out what prime lenses I was using to film this video, because in this nice weather I wanted to shoot outside instead of in the studio. I think maybe you appreciate that as well. So alright guys, that's it for today's video. Don't forget to check out my Australia workshops and don't miss out on that, because it's going to be awesome. Like I said, the link will be in the description box down below. And also there will be a link to my zines, and also the what I was talking about, the photos that I took in London during the workshop. There's a blog post where you can see all the settings, and maybe you can get an idea how I use the flash there. So the link will also be in the video description. Alright guys, that's it. If you like this video, as always, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and we will see each other very soon in the next one. Until then, auf Wiedersehen.